activist is someone who empowers the future generation.
It's hard to talk about education without a home. So in order to address and support education, we first have to support families having a place to live and reside.
Someone who creates art that inspires.
There are a million people who need people just like we do and need uplifted and everything else, but you chose to work with us.
Someone who examines their own biases and works toward collective liberation.
So we hope to be able to help voters just navigate the influx of misinformation that we very much expect to see in our state this year.
The gender gap acts as a virtual tax, making it difficult to both pay the bills and invest in our futures.
Someone who dares to reimagine what's possible.
And abortion access is the law of the land in Ohio.
The results are speaking for themselves because we're helping individuals who need it, and we're helping a neighborhood that needs it.
Someone who speaks truth to power.
Last night, hundreds of students and protesters, they demonstrated on Ohio State University.
We're all here together. We're all doing this together. So let's enjoy it. Let's be part of the community, and let's all make a difference for everybody.
An activist is someone who agitates.
Wow. Well, we are really off to a powerful start. What about that video? Talk about centering ourselves in what matters. Good evening. I'm Rebecca Butler. I am the chair of the YWCA Columbus Board of Directors, and I am thrilled to welcome you to Activists and Agitators 2024. More than a vote, uniting for democracy. Yes, right. Woo! Tonight, we will explore the history of democracy and its promises of freedom for some, but not all, and how we can shape a more equitable future in this state and in this country. To help ground this conversation, I would like to introduce Phil Flanagan, Justice, Equity, and Belonging Program Manager at YWCA Columbus, to acknowledge the land on which we are meeting tonight and to honor the history, culture, and resilience of Indigenous people and African-descended people. Phil.
Thank you, Rebecca. With gratitude and respect, YWCA Columbus acknowledges that the land on which we gather physically is the traditional territory of the Shawnee, Kaskaskia, Hopewell, and Miamia people. We honor the ancestors of those people who were betrayed and colonized, and stand in solidarity with the land and water protectors who continue to work toward preserving the planet on which we all rely. We also acknowledge the ongoing impact of settler colonialism, which includes genocide, land theft, forced displacement and assimilation, and the systemic exploitation, erasure, and exclusion that continue to impact Indigenous people. YWCA Columbus also acknowledges that our country's governing and economic systems are built on the brutality of forced and unpaid labor, willfully extracted from people of African descent through transatlantic enslavement. We honor the spirits of those who were trafficked from their homes and perished during the Middle Passage, those who survived and continue to fight for Black liberation, and those who will continue this struggle after us. We recognize that the systems of colonization and enslavement remain embedded in the fabric of the United States, resulting in ongoing anti-Black violence, exploitation, and death. We offer these acknowledgements as a small step toward honoring the history, culture, and resilience of marginalized people as they struggle for their basic human rights. We are all responsible for disrupting this harm, and YWCA Columbus is committed to working toward justice and healing alongside you. We know that we can create a more just and equitable society by acknowledging all power differentials, understanding the ways in which these dynamics live in us and the systems that we have created, and working toward change together.
Thank you, Phil. Absolutely. With this commitment in mind, we want to thank Kappa for hosting us in this beautiful space this evening. And thanks to all of you who are here in the Lincoln Theater in person and to those who are tuning in virtually. We could not host this event without your generosity and your support. So please join me in driving forward the mission of YWCA Columbus tonight with a gift that supports our valuable work in the community. We are aiming to set a record at Activists and Agitators this evening by collecting 100 gifts, and we're confident you can help us get there. So we're going to share progress throughout the evening with the tracker on the screen now. Please scan the QR code on your phone, or you will see this throughout the screen this evening. Please use this to build your own legacy of activism right now and show your commitment to a Columbus of peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Now, a couple of housekeeping items. You can access the digital program for tonight's event by using the camera on your phone to scan the QR code, or on the program that you received when you arrived. It is also on the screen right now. You are welcome to keep your phone out and continue to share memories and favorite moments throughout the program this evening using the hashtag Activists and Agitators. But please do not use your flash and keep your phones on silent. Lastly, I want to remind everyone that our audience tonight represents a wide range of lived experiences. And I know that we are going to live up to the YWCA mission, and we are going to engage respectfully with one another this evening. Now, it is my joy to introduce one of Columbus's favorite artists, Mika Moore.
In the wise words of Joe Clark from the classic movie Lean on Me, I ain't gotta do nothing but stay black and die. Inflation says it only goes up from here. Climate scientists say it only goes down from here. Floridians say the surge is the worst part. Atlanta says, I thought the flooding was for Florida. The next storm says, coming to a city near you soon. Meteorologists say they are currently watching 3 potential hurricanes, one that may take the same path as Helene. Bridges in Tennessee broke down like single mothers in this economy. Asheville residents carry dogs and cats on their back across what is left of their roads, and I, unlike a politician, am still speechless in this poem. Frozen by all the legendary catastrophes from this lifetime alone. Many Black women say this election is historical. Many state officials say the damage from this storm is historical. The 1870s said, okay, Black man, you can vote. Just gonna need a little literacy test, and here's a grandfather clause for good measure. The 1920s, with no pleasure at all, said, okay, women, I guess you can join along too. The 2000s slogan said, vote or die. 2021, January 6th to be precise, said, election? Election where? The ports at the strike say no to automation and low wages. Walmart says, we'll be getting new inventory soon. The news anchors say, expect significant increases in prices. Kroger says, are you sure you can afford that? Are you sure you scanned it? An attendant is on the way to make sure you spent your last dollar and not just your second to last. And the YWCA says, well, what do you say, Meek? What's your take on voting? Well, if honesty and clarity is kindness, I must reluctantly admit some days I can only manage what Joe Clark demanded, staying Black and death, not national debt, international threats, not even my own rights. I, like many Americans, can only afford to endorse getting by. Many times, inaugurations are not hope for the future, but rather a marker for the last presidency we barely survived. I'm 8 months pregnant. I could pop at any time in a world that appears to be threatening to do the same. So I guess the better question is, what will my son say if I don't vote with him in mind? But also, what will he say if that is all I did? The 2000 slogan said, vote or die, like death ain't the only equal thing we got. The only promise kept, die? I was gonna do that anyway. Vote or? What about vote and? Vote and demand our public servants actually serve. Vote and scream through the bullhorn with tears in the eyes. Vote and organize. Vote and buy a flashlight. Vote and make an emergency plan for the incoming storms. Vote and teach which laws are unlawful. Vote and Jimmy gerrymandering. Vote and love somebody like they are more than their labor. Like capitalism could never. Vote and build people power. My community has been more reliable than any politician I know. Democracy, is it not community with more gadgets and gears, my dear community? My friend Alan, currently in some sundown town prison, wishes a ballot would hold his name. My great-great-grandfather says, we ain't 3/5 no more. I walk my 18-year-old sister through the registration process, preach the significance of this election, even if it is a sermon I only slightly believe. So yeah, America, you'll get a vote out of me. If voting is a vehicle for equity, then I must at least turn the key, but times are too compromised to ride on the ballot alone. Beware, government. The people are getting impatient for a change of pace and direction. Our engines are revving from grief and destruction. And an election is not the only mobilization we got. Thank you guys so much.
Despite institutional disenfranchisement through campaigns of violence, misinformation, and weaponized policy, countless individuals throughout American history have resisted and challenged systems of exclusion, building people power as an engine of liberation. But America has yet to live up to the promise of what democracy can be, one that assures all people have agency, voice, and political power. In 1787, the founders drafted the United States Constitution, intentionally limiting democracy to a privileged few, the white, male, landowning class. For example, the 3/5 Compromise counted individuals who were enslaved as just 3/5 of a person, a move that both solidified their exclusion from democracy and inflated the congressional representation of Southern enslavers. Similarly, the establishment of the Electoral College prevented the public from directly electing the president and perpetuated a paternalistic narrative that most voters were uneducated and ill-equipped to directly affect their own government. The ruling class feared losing their power if the majority truly ruled.
At the end of the day, it's always been about power. And we can't talk about racism without talking about capitalism, just as we can't talk about capitalism without talking about racism. And the power that people are seeking is the power to protect their economic interests.
As the Civil War ended, the Reconstruction era began, which posed an opportunity for Black political and social progress and should have been a turning point for American democracy.
The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, these collectively constitute the Reconstruction Amendments. The 13th Amendment abolishes the institution of slavery with an exception for a crime. The 14th Amendment grants citizenship to all persons who are born on American soil. And then finally, the 15th Amendment grants voting rights to Black men. And African American men would exercise that right with a feverish energy. White Southerners are fighting back. They want desperately to recreate the labor controls that they had during the institution of slavery. And so Reconstruction, that moment of opportunity to create a new, more equitable society, doesn't fail, it is defeated.
The 15th Amendment was immediately met with states' efforts to roll back these advancements, including poll taxes, literacy tests, and other senseless voter registration rules. Despite these oppressive conditions, the early 20th century saw significant movement organizing. In 1920, after decades of strategic organizing and direct action, women won the right to vote. Yet, in practice, the passage of the 19th Amendment largely omitted women of color, mirroring the broader women's suffrage movement.
The social movement period, this period of 40s, 50s, and 60s, is the most visible period of Black public protest, involving people at the grassroots level, involving everyday people. Because it's not just about getting a bill passed through Congress, it's about empowering people to have a say in the everyday decisions that impact and that shape their lives.
The public's response to the violence enacted by the United States government, both domestically and globally, sparked widespread scrutiny. After decades of organizing and protests, the movement secured landmark legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The VRA prohibited states from denying citizens the right to vote based on race, included provisions that banned states from implementing discriminatory voting practices, and required jurisdictions with a history of voter discrimination to obtain pre-clearance before enforcing a new voter policy. The VRA had an immediate impact, with states registering hundreds of thousands of new voters within just a year of its passage. Although this marked a historic achievement and was expanded throughout the years, voting rights have faced significant setbacks at the federal, state, and local levels. the Supreme Court ruled that states with a history of voter discrimination no longer had to receive federal approval before changing their voting laws. This enabled states to pass restrictive voting policies and close thousands of polling locations, disproportionately affecting communities of color and low-income individuals. Further highlighting the impact of policy on fair representation are the issues of gerrymandering and redistricting. Gerrymandering involves drawing political districts to favor a political party, race, or class, to lessen the collective voting power of specific communities.
We just bore witness to the largest public protests in American history. We're talking about tens of millions of people taking to the streets, not only demanding justice for the victims of police violence, but also calling to an end to systemic racism. That was a sea change. What we're feeling now in terms of a push to make it harder for people to participate in the political process. These are laws that are designed to suppress what occurred in the summer of 2020.
Following a surge in voter participation in the 2020 election, at least 24 state legislatures have passed laws restricting the right to vote.
History tells us this, that change only occurs when people are willing to make the sacrifices that are necessary to put themselves on the front lines against the dominant status quo. And so we find ourselves now in this critical juncture where basic rights are very much under assault, as they have always been, but there is a coalition of folk, of activists and agitators, who are willing to make the sacrifices to lead the charge, saying we demand a better life, not just for ourselves, but for everyone.
I'm a rising senior this year at New Albany High School. All summer and leading into the fall, I've been registering people to vote. I just turned 17, so I'm not old enough to vote in this election, and I wanted to get other people my age as involved as they can in voting. In the coming years, this whole age group, even those who can't vote, 13, 14-year-olds, they're all gonna be voting someday. So it's important that they have a system that they feel supports them.
And so when we think about what that beloved community would look like, it has to incorporate peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. If we're able to achieve that, then we're able to achieve what so many have envisioned, and so many have fought for, and many have died for. That's the hope that we have to cling to.
I think it's important to see that young people and anyone, if you all come together, that something can happen.
Reflecting on the promise of American democracy, a vision of inclusion where every voice is valued, we must acknowledge that this promise has been hindered by systemic contradiction. True progress requires not just legal reforms, but also a sustained movement of people power. We must organize, hold officials accountable, and push for a democracy that realizes its ideals in practice. By combining policy reform with grassroots activism and agitation, we can make the promise of American democracy a reality.
So that was such an impactful video. Let's go ahead and give it another round of applause. Hi, good evening. My name is Danielle Demko, and I'm with Bath & Body Works. I also serve as a board member for the YWCA Columbus. Bath & Body Works has proudly supported YWCA Columbus for more than 27 years. We support, oh, yay, thank you. We support their advocacy and education for activities and events such as this, and I'm sure many of you were humbled by that literacy test that I failed like everyone else. So, and we honor and celebrate women in the community through their commitments to our commitments to the Women in Achievement program. We support the YWCA Family Center and the Women's Residency Program with donations of Bath & Body Works products. At Bath & Body Works, we believe that when everyone has access to the things that make them feel safe, healthy, and secure, the world is a better place. On the topic of democracy, our brand is committed to voting access and will delay store opening hours on Election Day to give all our associates time to vote. Yeah, that feels good, right? I am so proud of the work that Bath & Body Works does in our community, and am honored to represent the brand here this evening. So I'm standing here between you and our keynote speaker, so I am very excited to introduce her tonight. Tiffany Cross has been at the forefront of the most important issues facing our country. First, as the host of the Cross Connection on MSNBC, and now as the co-host of Native Land Pod. Please join me in giving a warm Ohio welcome to Tiffany Cross.
Hi, everybody. Okay, I'm gonna start by saying, no one in the world, nobody in history, has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of people who were oppressing them. I would love to say those are my words, they are not. Those are the words of Assata Shakur. She is an agitator, an activist in her own right, but she's also known as the mother of the fallen urban philosopher, Tupac Shakur. Good evening, everybody, and I'm so happy to be back here in Columbus tonight. Some of you may not know this, but I was actually born in Cleveland, Ohio. Yes. So I'm a daughter of this state. I left and moved to Atlanta when I was very young, but it's nice to be back home. And I know that you guys have a program this evening, and I think there is an open bar outside, so I don't want to take too long and stand between you and the open bar. I never want to be the person keeping you. And I have to get up before God tomorrow because I head to California. So I promise I won't keep you too long. Now, for anybody who's gone to a Baptist church, you know that's the first sign you're going to be in church all day. Famous last words, but it won't be today. So I want to begin, I think it's really important, by addressing a few lies that have been in our atmosphere, in our ether, and I just think they need to be addressed. So that first lie that I want to talk about is a lie that's been told throughout history, and it still persists today. That lie is, we are fighting for voting rights. We are fighting for voting rights. I want to tell you all today, that is a lie. Do you honestly think that 600 Black men, women, and children, and pregnant women who dared to cross Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965, who were spat upon and got their skulls cracked open, did so simply because they wanted the right to vote? Do we think that 30 people in Ocoee, Florida, who were violently beaten and lynched, died because they wanted to cast a ballot? We can go recent. Do we think the returning citizens in Florida, who were formerly incarcerated people, their arrest that was pioneered by the Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, just 2 years ago, it blanketed our TV screens, do we think they risked their very liberty just because they wanted to vote? No. That is not what this fight was about. That is not what this fight has ever been about. We are and have always been fighting for our survival. We are fighting for our humanity, for our dignity. We are fighting for harm reduction in a country that has still not come to terms with its changing demographics. We have fought for all these things since the inception of this country and since the stealing of this land. Here's another lie. The future is female. I just think it's funny how anytime somebody starts a sentence, I just think it's funny how if your wife or girlfriend says that to you fellas, she don't think nothing funny. You in for some trouble. I just think it's funny how we have these cute little slogans that are palatable to so many people, as long as it's about a change that's coming, yet never arrives. We women are half the population. You would not be surprised to know that we don't make up half of any Democratic body at the state or federal level. Yet white men, hi white men for Harris, no shade, white men comprise 30% of this population, but they still hold 62% of elected offices at the local, state, and federal levels. There's another divide too. The research shows that diversity has a very clear partisan divide. People of color hold less than 30% of Democratic seats at all levels of government, while less than 3% of Republican seats are held by non-white people. These are just facts. And we have to ask, I wonder why racist people always find such a comfortable home in one party and not the other. Racism is bipartisan, as we know, but certainly one sure does roll out a welcome mat. So the future, for sure, will be female, but today is too. As women, we are shaping the composition of this electorate and the country's overall priorities. And why might that be? Because we are the most impacted by them. We are women leaders today, leading, legislating, and fighting. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't feel in no ways tired. I'm energetic and I'm ready because my life depends on it. Now, this next one is not really a lie, but it's a misnomer. It's certainly misused by a lot of folks in the media, and that is voters of the heartland. I might lose my amen corner here in Ohio, but I'm gonna say, you all have seen for years, for decades, the endless segments of campaign reporters visiting counties and diners in the heartland, they call it, where few, if any, people of color eat. But somehow these voters are supposed to represent what real Americans are really thinking. I have never seen these reporters visit a Wingstop in East Cleveland or a Roscoe's in Los Angeles or Golden Corral in Montgomery, Alabama after Black Baptist churches let out. But honestly, are these not voters of the heartland? Do their views not matter? Do they not represent the part of the rising majority of this nation? And what about our Asian American Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, the fastest growing demographic in this country? What about our Latino brethren, who for the first time surpassed Black voters? Now I'm talking eligible voters, not registered voters, but they surpassed Black voters as the largest voting ethnic bloc. What about our indigenous brothers and sisters whose very land we occupy? And whose votes are most certainly valued, especially as races are increasingly won on the margins. Yet, white voters have the benefit of being discussed as multi-layered. They're multi-layered in their communities. They're college-educated white women. There's college-educated white men. There's suburban soccer moms. These are all euphemisms for white moms. Christian evangelicals. You note the white is silent there, but when they say Christian evangelicals, which is hilarious to me as somebody who grew up in Cleveland and then spent the rest of my childhood in Atlanta, you ain't go out Christian Black folks, but keep at it. For decades, we heard about Iowa and New Hampshire voters. These are two states where the population is 93% and 94% white, respectively. So with over 40 million Black people in America and even more people of color, the rising majority, all these descriptors could easily be applied to populations outside of white America. But what do we hear in the echo chambers? The Black vote. As if that captures who we are, what we care about. I mean, what about those former 20-something men who used to play pickup basketball after work, but now they're dads dropping off, picking up kids at sporting events on the weekend? They can be stockbrokers, FedEx delivery guys, writers, dentists, mid-level managers, real estate agents. We could call them basketball dads. That's a voting block. But no one's ever come up with these cute little colloquialisms for the Black community the way we have done for white voters? What about the I get off at work at 5, I'm so sick of these folks messing with me at the office, black mom? I was raised by one, so I know that voting block. The group chat black voters, I have a dozen more. We all don't live under one umbrella. Now here's another lie. So far, y'all stay with me. I might lose my amen corner on this one, but I'm gonna tell y'all a lie that this one really bothers me. If you don't vote, you don't count. The devil is a lie. I count because I'm a human being. I count because I'm a child of God who draws breath on this very earth. I count because I'm not simply your political commodity to pander to every 2 or 4 years. So I want to say, I can't be mad at the brother who says, so you want me to believe in this system that has poisoned my mother, imprisoned my brother, keeps my children in a dilapidated school, keeps my family in a red line community, and that's the very system that's supposed to save me. A system that every election you say is dire. A system that lies to me and says Donald Trump is the first white supremacist that we've had in the White House. I'm expected to believe that that system will save me. I'm supposed to believe in that system. I say here to you today, I've never asked such a thing. I'm not asking you all to believe in any system. I'm asking you to believe in you, brother. And I want you to believe in you, sisters. So that's really what I want us to talk about today. We have to think beyond upholding political systems that, quite frankly, have always oppressed and harmed. But let's instead focus on our humanity. What does democracy look like if we are its architects? It's interesting how we remember history in this country. You guys just watched the video. I heard my good friend, Dr. Hassan Jeffries, speaking in that. Hassan is a professor right here at Ohio State. He and I, he was at Morehouse when I was at Clark. He's much older than me, though. So he was a professor when I was but a wee freshman. But he who holds the pen writes history, so we know that. And often, when it's the colonizing power structure, that narrative doesn't quite reflect reality. For example, a good friend of mine, great writer and historian, Michael Harriot, he points out how master narratives spoon-fed the massive fictive tales about this beloved country we live in. This is a fantasy where Christopher Columbus discovered a land that he never set foot in. The story of pilgrims on the Mayflower building a new nation. It's the story of George Washington's cherry tree and Abraham Lincoln's log cabin. The story of the enslaved who spontaneously teleported themselves here with nothing but strong backs and a brain full of Negro spirituals. It's a history predicated on lies. But what if we are the narrators of this next chapter of American history? Before we get into that, I want to ask the audience a question. How's the racial reckoning going for you guys? Same. Let me tell you what I think many of us knew at the time and still know to be true. That was a moment in time. It was a brief slogan for government officials and the private sector to feel good about themselves. But as y'all know, they are over y'all's racial reckoning. In June and July of 2020, I mean, honestly, it seemed like every hour a Confederate monument was coming down, a major corporation pledged to spend billions of dollars on black causes, an overwhelmingly white city held a huge protest denouncing police brutality, and a politician would give a speech promising to do whatever they could to take on anti-black racism. You remember how everyone was so excited at that time, talking all about this cultural shift? I had so many conversations at that time. Some were with executives, and they would tell me stories about how they spoke with their employees, and they would tell me, Tiffany, no, we had a really honest conversation. I know I'm a white man, or I know I'm a white woman, but no, we brought everybody together, and it was just black employees, and we had a really honest conversation. And I feel so bad when I break it to them and say, no, you didn't. There was a meeting before the meeting, and there was a meeting after that meeting. Everybody got together and decided, okay, how honest we gonna be? We do that because we heard the way the conversation was being framed. We heard people say, we should be hiring more Black people, or we should be giving more minorities opportunities. You guys hear that framing, right? That framing is still giving everybody else the power. That maintains the power structure. It still positions the existing power structure to have agency over our lives and our livelihood. That's the thing that we want to disrupt. I'm not ready to celebrate a cultural shift because that don't last. Don't talk to me about a cultural shift. Talk to me about a power shift. I don't want to hear conversations about if you should hire somebody who looks like me. I want to hear a conversation about what it looks like when somebody like me, who looks like me, is trying to decide who they're going to hire. A power shift says we are doing the considering. A power shift is not asking to be allowed to do anything. A power shift is declaring what is and what is to be. There's no real public discussion of wealth, taxes, guaranteed income, job programs, aggressive school and housing integration, and other policies that would be necessary to improve conditions for people of color in this country on a broad scale. And by the way, when you improve conditions for people of color, that impacts everyone. Everyone benefits. There is no they're winning, so I must be losing. That's a lie that one candidate has been trying to sell for decades. I can testify, I ain't winning. It's just a shift. So please don't say racial reckoning to me if we're not talking about liberation, equality, more access to capital, and a disruption to this current landscape. What we've seen instead, which we were really quite honestly braced for, is a counter-mobilization on the right. Efforts to weaken diversity and inclusion initiatives and limit the teaching of truth and history and facts. Laws taking away agency over our very own bodies. GOP-appointed judges are striking down programs specifically designated to promote equality. What we see instead is 80% of white business owners receiving at least a percentage of the funding they request from a bank, while only 66% of Black, Indigenous people of color get the same. What persists is the average loan size for small white-owned companies being over $30,000 higher than that for small Black, Indigenous people of color-owned companies. We see companies run by us paying up to 7.8% in interest on average for loans, compared with 6.4% for everyone else. It's about so much more than voting and politics for us, you guys. This is about our very life. So we must claim for ourselves every single right that belongs to a freeborn American, political, civil, and social. And we must get these rights. The fight continues. And let's be clear, the battle we waged is not for ourselves, not for us alone. It's for all people. It is a fight for ideals, unless, of course, this nation is false to its founding, become in truth the land of the thief and the home of the slave, as the great W.E.B. Du Bois once said. Battles that my grandparents and great-grandparents fought are resurfacing. So I know for me, we say this a lot in my community, we are the hopes and dreams of the ancestors. Somebody prayed for me to be standing on this stage right now. Somebody prayed for you all to be sitting in this audience. They fought battles so that you may one day sit in these very seats. So I would ask you, I ask all of us to consider, as we embark on our journey, if we are the hope and the dreams of our ancestors, what is our hope for the generations to come after us? What seed are we sowing into the pedigree today that generations from now will reap? In a century or two, when we've all become the ancestors, what part of our superpowers did we harness and gift to our communities that will ripple through time? What shackles will we break? What systems will we disrupt? What spaces will we occupy? What chains will we burn away? What doors will we open? What heights will we seek? What songs will we sing? What history will we make? What did we fight for? Who did we agitate? And what did our activism produce? Thank you all for giving me a few minutes. I know there's a panel, so looking forward to being a part of the conversation.
Good evening, everyone, and I want to once again thank Tiffany Cross for being here tonight. I also want to take a brief moment to introduce myself as well as our panel moderator while we prepare for tonight's panel conversation. I'm Kristen Rost, Vice President of the Nationwide Foundation. Nationwide has had a long tradition of creating meaningful impact in the communities where we live and work, particularly with organizations that are affecting change and driving forward our commitment to protect what matters, including future generations. Children deserve to play, to experience joy and belonging, and that's exactly what the brand new play spaces at YWCA's Family Center provides. Nationwide is proud to have been a major supporter of the important playground construction project, recognizing that when families have the support they need, they have fewer barriers to participating fully in our society, which, as you have heard tonight, is a cornerstone of democracy. These major improvements and the important mission of YWCA Columbus to eliminate racism and empower women must be led by someone with a keen eye and a huge heart. And it is my pleasure to introduce that person tonight, the President and CEO of YWCA Columbus, Elizabeth Brown.
Thank you, Kristen. And thank you as well to the incredible voices we've already heard on the stage and in our video. Whenever doubt creeps in for me and I worry about how we take on the enormous project of fully realizing our democracy, people like Tiffany Cross, Professor Jeffries, the student Rachel in our video, and the incredible panel of experts you're about to hear from remind me that we already have everything we need. Before we get to our panel and their insights on democracy in Ohio today, I do want to remind everyone here tonight that YWCA Columbus is currently accepting applications for two exciting pieces of our organization. Women of Achievement 2025, it will be our 40th celebration this year. We know we'll have an incredible class. And Leadership for Social Change 2025. So if you know a young leader, and I know some Leadership for Social Change graduates are here tonight, if you know a young leader who's looking to be a change maker in this community, please visit ywcacolumbus.org for more information. I also must share again the QR code to donate to the mission and work of our organization. As you can see, we are making progress toward our goal of 100 gifts right here tonight. We are grateful you're here. We are so appreciative of every single dollar you share with us to help ensure peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. So with no further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage tonight's panelists. Of course, Tiffany Cross, who you just heard, is at the forefront of issues pertaining to journalistic integrity. Can you sit here? Yvette McGee Brown, the first African-American female Ohio Supreme Court Justice. And a driving force behind Issue 1, the Citizens Not Politicians ballot amendment. And Rhiannon Carnes, the co-founder and executive director of Ohio Women's Alliance and a key player in grassroots efforts to pass Ohio's Reproductive Freedom Amendment last November. I am so happy to be here tonight with all three of you, and I'm going to do minimal talking so that we can hear as much from the incredible experience that each of you brings to the table and wisdom that each of you brings to the table. I want to start talking about, and really picking up on a lot of what Tiffany discussed, barriers to voting, what that looks like here in Ohio. So when we look nationally, we know that when leaders with a platform make false claims of voter fraud, stolen elections, really the natural result of that is to sow doubt in the legitimacy of our system. That has led to a flurry of new voter laws and regulations. And supporters of those laws argue that they protect democracy, that they safeguard democracy. But the laws in practice intentionally disenfranchise, and they weaken equal access to the ballot. So, example, here in Ohio, the state legislature passed one of the strictest voter ID laws in the country. Yvette, you are a former board member of our organization. You know that the people we serve at YWCA, and many, many people like them across the state, are the most harmed by these kinds of laws. So I want to ask you to jump in here, Yvette, and talk a little bit more about what Ohio has done to disincentivize people to vote.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, the legislature, again, one of the reasons we have citizens, not politicians, on the ballot is that the legislature, which is 67% Republican, which does not reflect the demographics of this state, have continued to pass laws so that they disincentivize people from going to the polls, people who don't have IDs. And they say things like, oh, you can go get a state ID. A lot of people can't do that, and they don't know how to do that. And so one of the things you do when you're in power and you want to stay in power is making sure that you use all of those levers of power to keep people from going to the polls, to keep people from voting, to create this mythical sense that somehow there's all of these fake people voting, when that could not be further from the truth. Most people who want to vote, they need access to the polls. They don't want to stand in line for 4 hours to vote. And if you look at even how they do polling locations, where in the inner city, there's fewer polling locations, so people have to stand in line longer. People who often are hourly wage workers, who if they stand in line for hours are not getting paid, and yet you can go to the suburbs and find where people can just walk in, vote, and leave. So that's one of the things that we're trying to address, is to make sure that we have people in the State House who reflect Ohio and aren't just people trying to hold on to their own power.
That's so important. This issue of gerrymandering affects these laws being made because it's those same elected officials that vote for the passage of those laws or uphold, a rule that the Secretary of State might make. So can you talk a little bit more about issue 1 and the issue of gerrymandering in Ohio? And specifically the manipulation of ballot language that we all need to be very clear on, because this impacts voting access.
So one of the things about voting, and I really loved your point about how, people whose lives don't get better, what incentive do they have to go out and vote? Jamie Harrison, who's now the head of the DNC, who ran for the Senate in South Carolina, he wrote this book called One Dirt Road that I'll never forget, that he said in that book when he was campaigning for the U.S. Senate, he went into this long dirt road to this house, and this man answered the door. It was a black man in rural South Carolina. And he asked that man for his vote. And this man said to him, you know what, son? He said, you see that dirt road out there? He said, no matter who comes here and asks me to vote for them, for all of my life, that dirt road has never changed. It didn't matter who was in office, whether they were Republican or Democrat, that dirt road stays the same. And so part of the problem that we have in Ohio is that if people who do not have access to power don't feel that their lives change, why should they vote? There's no incentive for them to go and vote. And so what we've done with Citizens Not Politicians, those were ordinary citizens. We gathered 731,000 votes from all 88 counties simply through volunteers, right? These are people who had nothing to gain. They stood out in the rain and cold weather. They got all of these votes. We knew that the ballot board, which is controlled by Republicans, the ballot board is supposed to give a summary of language to make sure that people know what they're voting for, so they don't have to read pages and pages while they stand in the voting booth. And so we knew that they would try to play games with the language. And what our Secretary of State did, little Frankie LaRose, what he did was little Frankie came up with this language that literally says the opposite of what issue 1 is. The ballot language says that it is to encourage gerrymandering, right? To allow unelected people to manipulate districts, to allow gerrymandering in this state. It is the most egregious ballot language I've ever seen. But then what happens is it goes to an Ohio Supreme Court that is 4-3 Republican, and they vote that the language is a description because, and I love Justice Fisher, who he did an interview this summer on the front page and said, "I'm nobody's person, I'm my own person." Okay, so he writes this concurring opinion and says, he gives this definition of gerrymandering, and he says, well, that's exactly what this will do. It will require this commission of 15 citizens, not politicians, citizens who have no vested interest in how the districts are drawn except to keep communities together and to make it fair, that they will be required to gerrymander because of the definition of gerrymandering. It's outrageous, but we're not done. We're going to defeat it because all you need to tell your friends, vote yes on 1. Vote yes on 1.
Thank you so much. And YWCA has supported, has endorsed Citizens Not Politicians, has endorsed issue 1, and that is, we all want to get engaged in fair representation, and this is a basic way to do so. There are so many ways that regular people can engage in their democracy, and I want to bring Rhiannon into that conversation because progress is most effective when driven by the will of the people. History has shown us this, that community members make significant impacts on the success of social movements. From Loretta Ross and other founding mothers of reproductive justice to Georgia Gilmore, who fed and funded the Montgomery bus boycott, successful movements in our nation are built by everyday folks. And Rhiannon, you and I met for the first time. Rhiannon was at the time a respiratory therapist at Ohio Health. She experienced the 2016 election, and not to speak for you, but you needed to do something. I was a member of city council at the time, and I met her as somebody organizing the Columbus Women's March in her spare time. She just said, I need to do something. I need to raise my hand and make a bigger impact. So there is much more to your story than that first ignition of it, but I think it tells a powerful, it really shares a powerful lesson about people can make change, how people can make change. So can you share more about how you came to the work you're doing now and what you've learned from resistance efforts and activism that's come before us?
Yes, so when I started community organizing in 2016, I was a single mom, struggling, trying to make ends meet, working in healthcare and putting my son through college at the time. And also I was witnessing one of the most pervasive, sexist, racist, misogynistic presidential campaigns in my life. And for the first time, as someone who served in the United States Air Force, and a first generation of college graduates, for the first time I stopped blaming myself of not being good enough, strong enough, worthy enough to achieve my career advancements. And instead looking at what was playing on a world stage and platform, the culture and the systems and institutions that were just unfair and at times unjust. And so I reached out to my local elected official, Liz, and you seen me and you listened and you showed up for me, and you were at my first rally that I organized. I did not know what I was doing at all, and you were there. And so I continued organizing locally, met folks throughout the state who were outraged just like myself, and I ended up leading over 15,000 people to Washington, D.C. for the largest protest march in United States history. So thank you, Liz, and you empowered me. And I came back home and I wanted to do more, and I really wanted to invest in the lived experiences of women of color and young people and gender expansive folks. And so I co-founded Ohio Women's Alliance, and we're Ohio's only statewide reproductive justice organization building power at the intersections of democracy and reproductive freedom. And, you know, for me, it was just those small acts of reassurance that in the shoulders and legacies in which we stand on, you named some movement leaders that inspire us all. And I'm also thinking about, you know, the people in our everyday lives and the hidden figures, if you will, so like our matriarchs, our mothers, our grandmothers, my mother who inspired me and is really the reason why, you know, I'm here today. But it is the small moments that we share between each other, like here in this room, of pouring and investing in each other that ignites monumental movements towards the power shift in which you talked about earlier.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I really love that description. That is so much in line. If you noticed in the video when we talked about the passage of the VRA, we talked about how the movement secured the VRA because these policy wins are built by people. Sometimes laws are passed because people got engaged through their elected officials, and sometimes they're passed because people got engaged at the ballot box, like Citizens Not Politicians, like last year's Reproductive Freedom Amendment. And I want to ask another question about that, Rhiannon. It was an incredible collective effort across the state with diverse partnerships, and particularly Ohio Women's Alliance played a role in its passage an incredible role in its passage due to the grassroots engagement of Black voters across the state. It was a powerful example of what grassroots engagement can do. So can you talk about, in looking back, we're staring down a really important ballot initiative. We just came off one in Ohio. Talk about the importance of getting involved in citizen-led ballot initiatives.
Yes, I think, you know, ballot initiatives are the perfect example of how to be civically engaged through an intersectional lens and how to reclaim our people power. And last year I had the honor to sit at the leadership table to enshrine the right to reproductive freedom and abortion access in our state constitution. But that work would not have been possible in a silo alone and if we just only relied on voting for politicians. That was long-term work, years of work that we've done to destigmatize what reproductive freedom looks like through an intersectional lens. And I have to shout out our partners in Repro, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio, ACLU Ohio, Abortion Forward. All of us were able to do the work over years to get our community involved, to march, to protest, to talk to our elected officials. And so when it came time to put it on a ballot and shift policy, we were ready. We not only knocked doors, we made calls, we donated. And so now, you know, Ohio is an example for the rest of the country. There's 10 reproductive freedom ballot measures at the ballot box this year. And we are an example of what it means when we exercise our civil liberties through an intersectional lens.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, thank you. Tiffany, I want to pull out a couple things that you said during your keynote and really bring them into this conversation about people taking power and democracy into their own hands. So you referenced the concept of the master narrative. How do regular people de-center the master's narrative? What mechanisms can we use, not to seek confirmation with the media, but education? Can we play a role?
Can I just first say to Rhiannon, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
When I say thank you for your service, I mean in our armed services, but also to this country and to your community, because that's an amazing story.
And that is precisely what change looks like. So I'm honored to share this
Thank
space
you
and
so
stage
much.
with you today. I'm gonna ask either my panelists, the moderator, or the audience to help me out, but who was your governor in 2014? He became a cable news.
John Kasich.
John Kasich, thank you very much. What'd you call Little Frankie? Yeah, that was polite, because I was thinking another F word, but anyway. John Kasich, here's an example. John Kasich signed into law an equally egregious voter suppression law. And then he was gifted with a 6-figure cable news contract when he left governor. Not one single time was he ever confronted about that law. He was treated just like a cable news commentator. We normalize suppression in the country. When there is someone so bold enough to speak a truth that makes some people uncomfortable, they are silenced. I got a testimony. I think we have to be bold and audacious enough to speak up, because if we all speak up, they can't cancel everybody. But as consumers of the media, I challenge people, one, just to let you all know, print drives broadcast. Every morning news call is, what did the Times write? You know, here's an interesting story in this paper. That the wires, that all drives newscast. I encourage people to diversify your news diet. I've stopped watching so much cable news. I read more than I watch television. I do read the Times every day, but I also read the op-ed pages of the Journal. It's a more conservative outlet, but I want to know what they're talking about too. I stopped consuming Western media alone. I read Al Jazeera as much as I read the Times. I stopped reading just domestic news. I watch BBC News in the morning. I also read the Financial Times. I'll read the BBC website. That's a small thing, but how we disrupt change is by arming ourselves with information. And there is an intention about what we see and what we're told. I think I have a sneaking suspicion, you guys may agree, that cable news is salivating at the idea of a Donald Trump presidency, part deux. They would love to take your precious James David from Ohio, J.D. Vance, I call him James David, and plaster him all over television. You heard so many conversations about, oh my gosh, he just performed so well tonight in the debate. Well, you can lie pretty.
That's right.
But maybe your truth is clumsy. That is appealing. And so I think we really just have to get back to basic common sense and a thirst for knowledge. I'll close this section by saying I used to watch Cheers. I love Cheers. Well, you guys are supposed to gasp, like, what? Cheers? Is she alive then? Yes. Anyway. But they had smart humor on that show. I watched Seinfeld, and I remember they were all sitting around, and they were like, name the most unattractive world leader. And they all, had different things. Somebody was like, Golda Meir, and they, went back and forth. It was disrespectful, but it was kind of funny. And I thought we would never even have that kind of humor today. The dumbing down of the American electorate is intentional. They want us to doom scroll, look at Instagram, be at tables full of people like this all the time, getting that selfie. So I think the best way we can disrupt this landscape is arm ourselves with information and not just go for the chocolate cake, but take some of that broccoli and protein as well.
Yeah,
that's right.
You know what, that is so powerful, because I think their biggest fear is that if the people collectively realize the power that they have, it would change fundamentally what this country is. And I think that is their biggest fear. So they have to keep, I always say that we were so busy doing the electric slide when Obama was in office that we forgot that they were organizing 50
Yes,
states.
and forgot that time would end.
Yes, and so while we're doing that, they're taking over state houses and have enabled themselves then to control the electorate of state houses, which is why everybody's concerned about what happens in this election and whether there will be a peaceful transfer of power.
And that's where a lot of that crappy policy comes up from. State legislatures all across this country, which we already know are dominated by conservative, mostly white men, which is a challenge.
Yep.
And Yvette, you said it, that if people really know their power, right, and trust themselves, not how what I take so much from what you said, Tiffany, is that we need to be aware of the packaging of news, the packaging of information. It is packaged with a point of view, with a perspective. And if people know their power and can interrogate that packaging, then we gain more power. But we also know that the power of voting isn't always apparent to every voter. And you talked about this in your keynote, Tiffany, and I'm going to bring another quote into the conversation. Latasha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter, she writes, I'm quoting her directly, she writes, "You're telling people to believe in something that mistreats them, that has exploited them and their family, that has locked up their brothers, and now we're asking them to put their faith in that same system that they're looking at every single day that keeps them at a disadvantage. That sounds dishonest," she says. And that's, I really think, the fundamental kind of unifying question that we're grappling with here tonight, knowing the history of how power structures have tried to manage information and manage involvement, and also seeing examples of real people, Rhiannon, who know their power, believe their power, and can organize. We have to bring that all together. And so I really want to try to close the conversation on the hopeful note of how we scale this problem that Latasha Brown so eloquently described. So,
can I say something quickly about Latasha Brown? I love this woman. If you don't know about Latasha Brown, get into her. If I could bottle her up and give her away for Christmas, I would. If you were writing the story of America today, you could not write it without Latasha Brown. I'm in a group chat. I have a cohort of women who we talk 1,000 times a day. You guys know how that goes. By the time I get back to my phone, I'll have 375 missed messages. I can't keep up. But it's me, it's Joyanne Reed. Please watch her on MSNBC every night at 7. Sunny Hostin on The View, Jamel Hill, formerly ESPN, Carrie Champion. It's a group of us. Latasha is Mother Earth incarnate. She embodies love. You cannot tell the story of America without her story. Are you guys familiar with the Lincoln Project? You're more familiar with the Lincoln Project than you are with Latasha Brown. And that's a big challenge for me. After the election in 2016, 60 Minutes did this whole sit down with the Lincoln Project about how amazing they are. Sure, they cut some great ads for sure, but the Lincoln Project were full of never Trumpers. These were the very people who helped pave the road for Trump to walk into the White House. This is the only Republican Party we have ever known. These same people were a part of the first MAGA movement. This is not the first Make America Great Again campaign we had. Ronald Reagan was the first Make America Great Again campaign. Now, some of these other people may have been more articulate, and Donald Trump may have been less clumsy, but their policies were just as damaging to my community. So when I see people celebrating the Lincoln Project, when Latasha was putting her very life on the line, organizing voters all across this country. Right now, do you know where Latasha is? On her way to North Carolina. Is she registering people to vote? Partially, but she's also taking generators to people who are living without power. So I just think this is another way that we have to disrupt this convenient narrative. Look at the nice Lincoln Project people who pulled the knives 6 inches out of our back, and let's celebrate them. But bypass this woman who risked life and limb and organized millions of people across this country to actually vote. It's a difference in what they do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm paraphrasing a mentor here, but for decades, a lot of folks dog whistled, and then Donald Trump barked, and they said, oh, what? Right? But that's really what you're saying about the Lincoln Project, and making sure we recognize the people who are on the ground fighting for real change, real people power all along. So despite all this, Rhiannon, why do you still vote in a system that has been used and misused to depress votes? Where's our hope?
I vote because these folks are going to represent us whether we go to the ballot box or not. And so that is exactly what we have to lose, people speaking and representing us without us having a voice and a stake. And you know, everything you said resonated with me as someone who's in our communities, working in our communities and understanding the lives and the lived experiences that they go through every single day. And we have to give people something to vote for. We can't just go into communities 2 weeks before an election simply because it's GOTV and tell them to vote for someone who they know nothing about. And so at Ohio Women's Alliance, we do year-round civic engagement because that is definitely important. But we also need to provide direct services to give them some relief. And I feel like we have to approach voter education through a holistic lens. And so educating folks and letting them know that, yeah, our districts aren't fair. In fact, they're unconstitutional. You're being purged from the voter files, while also understanding that there are these disproportionate disadvantages that Black and brown communities face, like incarceration rates, Black maternal infant mortality rates, and even just the gaps and divides in generational wealth. And so we must be investing in them, providing resources, and then also equipping them with tools to be able to push back against the opposition and or be able to find solutions for themselves to improve the conditions in their community.
Yvette, why do you vote?
I vote because my grandmother was born in Macon, Georgia in 1908. And she did not get to vote until she was a middle-aged woman. And so no matter whether it's raining or snowing, I go out and vote. And I vote for her. And I vote for all of the people who fought. You talked about some of those people. All of those people who fought that allowed me to be a lawyer, to be a Supreme Court justice. That didn't happen by accident, and I will not dishonor them by staying at home. And so what I do when I'm out there is I wish all of you have to talk to the people in your life. We have power. Yeah, it's not a perfect system, but there's no better system. We have to take our power back and we have to vote. Too many people died on the Edmund Pettus Bridge or being hung in the South. I mean, Woodrow Wilson was the first MAGA president because he took away, when Reconstruction came and Black people got jobs in the federal government, Woodrow Wilson came in as president and removed all of those people, took people who were working in supervisory positions and made them janitors if he didn't fire them. We have got to honor the people who've been fighting all of these years by voting. Even if it doesn't feel like things change, it absolutely won't change if you don't vote.
Tiffany, I'm going to ask you to close us out. Why do you vote? How do we sustain energy towards people power and democracy? Yeah. I mean, we brought you here. You knew I was going to give you a tough one.
All of our democracy problems in 10 seconds. I vote because I live in service to community. My life is all I have, and I'm responsible for it. And I think it is, to live in service is what it costs for the privilege of being me. I vote because I would rather impact politics than have politics have an adverse impact on me. And I vote for all of you, even if some of you out there don't vote, if some of you all disagree with something I said or we don't politically align, I still vote for you because I believe in your humanity.
Thank you. Thank you to this incredible panel tonight. Thank you. Thank you. We go out? Okay. As we close here tonight, I want to thank once again our wonderful panelists, and in particular Tiffany Cross for joining us all the way in Columbus. I'm grateful also to our sponsors for their generosity and support of this important conversation, and of course to all of you for attending live and virtually. YWCA Columbus's mission calls for a community in which all people can live in peace, justice, freedom, and dignity. We envision a fully inclusive, multiracial democracy where every voice is heard and valued. That is why we gather tonight. In 1935, one of the Harlem Renaissance's most accomplished artists, Langston Hughes, rode by train from New York City to Ohio. It was the depths of the Great Depression, and as he watched American cities, towns, and countrysides speed past, he saw a nation in distress. He too was in distress, and so he sought to help in the way he knew how. He wrote. On that train with the view of the nation out his window, he wrote to the many who had been failed by an unrealized promise of the American dream. The poem, eventually titled "Let America Be America Again," invoked the intersectional struggle of immigrants, low-wage workers, and Black Americans, rallying a vision for a new future. In the penultimate stanza, there is a cry for hope, a vow of resolve, and a call to collective activism. Hughes writes, "Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be." To Langston Hughes, his friends, his ancestors, and so many others, what had the land of the free ever meant? And yet Hughes reminds us, the promise of democracy is not one that someone else is planning to keep for us. It is ours to redeem. Thank you for joining us here tonight. To close out our program, please welcome to the stage the ladies of the Lincoln.
I've been walking with my face up to the sun. Weight on my shoulder, a bullet in my gun. Oh, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. I do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's when I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones.
Early in the morning, before the sun begins to shine, we're gonna start moving towards that separating line. salvation. And I'll fight with the strength that I got until I die. So I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Do you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. Around the bend might be hard to face 'cause I'm all alone, and I just might fail, but Lord knows I've tried. Sure are stars fill the sky. Stand up, take my people with I'm gonna take my people. Calling me to answer, gonna keep on keeping on. I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Do you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. I hear freedom calling, calling me to answer. Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones. I go to prepare a place for you.